The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Most of you probably know this about me, but I did not grow up a country boy. I did not get into flannels until much later in life. I grew up in about a mile from the Detroit city line. When some people say they're from Detroit, and I'm like, okay, what part? They're like, Canton? I'm like, nope. Sorry, doesn't work. Canton is Canton, Detroit is Detroit. I grew up 1 mile from the city line of Detroit in Redford. And it was in that old World War II style housing when, all the GIs came back and they did this huge housing project around the suburbs and just kind of grew up there. And our houses were so close together, they were only separated by driveways. And so me and my friends would play football on the front lawn, and it was about, I don't know, smaller than the sanctuary, the front yard. Real easy to mow. That was the bonus. Real easy to mow. But this one time I go camping, and you look up and you see stars. And you're like, wow, that's a lot more than I can see where I'm at, because, you got the orange streetlights everywhere. But I always had like this pull, like I want to get out of the city. I don't want to be in the city anymore. Too many people. Some people really like lots of people surrounding them. I don't know who they are, but they're out there. And it's not me. And I wanted to get out of the city and get out into the country. My dad actually wanted to be out in the country so badly that he sneakily put chickens in our garage and raised chickens in the garage. And then he gave eggs to the neighbors to keep them quiet. That was before, the city made any kind of, yeah, I guess you can have a chicken or two. We had 5 chickens. One of them turned out to be a rooster. That was interesting morning when we found out one of them was a rooster, and all our neighbors were like, what in the world is that? So we didn't grow up in the country where you just kind of hear them in the distance normally. So a rooster crowing maybe, 50 feet from your back door, that was rather odd. My dad took care of it. No questions. He took care of it. Well, then, we ended up getting out to the country. And, I remember being around the campfire and seeing bonfires and stuff. And I'm like, I need to have a bonfire. I don't know how to start one, but I need to have a bonfire. So we're having a whole bunch of kids from the church over, and we're going to start ourselves a bonfire. And I had to get it going before they got there. And I'm like, well, I got this big grass pile. That'll make a great bonfire. You guys are laughing at me already. It's like, that burns, right? What is a bunch of grass, lots of twigs. And so I'm trying to start it on fire, but it's a little wet, because it's a pile of grass that's been out in the dew. And so the middle is not really that greatly dried. So it won't really catch. So I'm like, gasoline. That's easy, right? Just pour some gas on there. So I'm pouring some gas on, you're all smiling. You know how this story ends already. I'm pouring some gasoline on the grass pile and thinking, this is going to be good. I'm going to get this fire started. And I got, one of those, I wanted to be safe. So I got one of the longer lighters, not, like the clicky things, but one of those over there. And I just kind of reached down, hovered over the grass fire, and I clicked like this. I don't remember much. There was an explosion. I remember that. I remember I still had my eyebrows. I was thankful for that. And my eyelashes were still there. My goatee was intact. But I remember staring up at the sky thinking, what just happened? There was a large explosion. I was like, okay, maybe that wasn't so smart. I guess there's fumes with that. I thought it was more like, starter fluid for your charcoal or something. Gasoline, it like that. Learned that the hard way. So I'm trying to get this thing going. I got all these like 25 kids coming over my house, teenagers. They're going to want a bonfire, and I'm trying to build this bonfire up. And I'm within the city lines of Belding at this point. So I don't know if you know this about grass fires, but they're also smoky. And I'm on a main road, M44. It was a main road. And all of a sudden this thing starts smoking like crazy. Won't stop smoking. Yellow smoke is just pouring across the road, causing this fog and disrupting traffic. And I'm sitting there anxious, like someone's going to call the fire department on me. Like, I do have my permit. I went to the place to get my permit. I figured that much out, but they didn't give me like, here's how you start a fire. Please don't stand over gasoline while with a lighter. That won't be a good deal. I didn't know that part. They didn't tell me how to do all that stuff. But eventually the kids came over and they saw my fire, in air quotes as much as I can. They saw that fire and they're like, man, this city boy does not know how to start a fire. So here I am, kind of like the guy in charge, and I'm humbly like, all right, teach me how to build a bonfire. And they taught me how to build a bonfire. My grass did burn down all the way. We started a second one, and they're like, well, you need logs. I'm like, well, they don't burn. You just, try to light a log on fire with a lighter. It don't work. They're like, well, you need kindling and you need something to start it. You need the tinder. And they showed me how to actually assemble a bonfire. And now I can say, that was, 20 years ago. Now I'm master fire builder. I know how to do them because we had a wood stove for 17 years as the primary heat source of my home. So I had to build a bonfire in my living room like 3 times a day. So I figured it out, how to do this bonfire thing. But my very first bonfire, it wasn't all that great. It wasn't great. So I didn't used to be this educated man that stands before you, this country, rural, whatever in plaid. I was not always this way. I had to learn a lot of stuff. Well, fire is a symbol of baptism in the Bible, believe it or not. Even though you're going into water, John talks about water. He talks about fire. And there is a very famous baptism from history that I just learned about this week. It was the baptism of a man named Clovis. That's a pretty cool name. Has anyone ever named their kids Clovis anymore? I'd never met a Clovis before. He was Clovis the First. There's a picture of him right there. That's, he was awful pale, if you ask me, but okay, that's a statue. But he was, born in 466. So this is a long time ago. And he lasted to about 517. He was the king of the Franks. He was the very first king of what would become France. He established a monarchy there. And so the leadership of the area was a lot of like petty feudal kings, and the people weren't all that pleased with that. And so he said, no, I'm going to be the single king that rules the entire area. So he brought in all these petty kings and kind of conquered them all. And he wanted to make sure that his monarchy was going to be passed down from generation to generation. And it did. He was the founder of a dynasty that ruled the Frankish kingdom for the next 2 centuries. It was a pretty long standing. His family was there. But the way that he established his rule was that he was a warlord. He was conquering and expanding his kingdom, as kings always do. That's what kings do. But he had a thorn in his side called the church. He's like, I don't like these clergy members, but it seems as though I'm butting up against what I can accomplish without them. And so he decided that he was going to build an alliance with the clergy of the Catholic Church of the area. So he took a Catholic wife, converted to Catholicism, and got baptized. So this was kind of a big deal back in the day. Now, when historical kings convert into the faith, it steers the ship of Christian history, good or bad. It does. Like we label this stuff in the books. Regardless of their intentions, things do happen. Now, it did spread the influence of the early Catholic Church throughout much of Western Europe. So a lot of things came out of this. His wife, Clotilda, you can see here kneeling before an altar, she was actually venerated as a saint for converting her husband. The Catholic Church thought that was just the coolest thing. But upon his baptism, a priest told him something that was absolutely radical that I think captures the heart of repentance. He told them this. I don't like to put words on the screen unless they really matter. So these words matter. He told him, worship what you have burned and burn what you have worshipped. that like hit me like a ton of bricks this week. Like I was reading the story of Clovis and he said that. And I'm like, what does that mean? Sounds like something Yoda would say or something. Like that's really deep. I got to thinking about it, and a lot of his warlording left a lot of folks desolate, poor, dead, broken. Like war's nasty. And so he was expanding his influence through violence and domination and all this kinds of stuff. He burned cities to the ground. Like he did that. So the priest was asking him at his baptism to find Christ in the suffering that he created. That was his repentance that he was asked to do. I want you to go to everything you burned, all the families, all the towns, all the whatever. Go and worship Christ there in solidarity with the people that you hurt. Wow. That's amazing. Like those words, like worship what you have burned. Like go to the places that you burned and find Christ there and worship him. Because what he previously worshiped was power, influence, wealth, domination, everything that kings need to embrace to be a good king. He worshiped those things. And when he converted into the faith, they're like, well, we got some conflict of interest going on here because Christ isn't that way. And so the priest asked him, worship what you have burned and burn what you have worshiped. He's asking him to burn that former life and the value system that he held of domination and violence and wealth and influence and power and all that stuff. He's saying, burn that to the ground and then go and stand amongst the people that you have harmed in solidarity and find Christ there. Boy, if we had the audacity to ask this kind of conversion from modern day folks with power and influence when they convert into the faith, like I think it might change who we prop up as faith heroes. Now, growing up in like an evangelical fundamentalist thing, like whenever a celebrity converted into the faith, it was like they immediately got status of now they can teach me all that they know. When the truth was like they're absolutely brand new to this thing. They don't even know what they're talking about yet. But since they were a celebrity, it's like, oh, teach me all the stuff. You must be like famous now. Use your fame and power and influence to do good things. And so if we actually said this phrase to those people who have converted in when they have all of this wealth and power and influence, all that, it's like, wow, I think we might see a different kind of a church all around us. But I also think that most people, when they convert into the faith, like it takes a long time to get the repentance into the value systems that we currently hold dear. A lot of the times we just take our current value systems and then we just baptize them in Christian language. And then we're like, all right, we're good to go. I'll just do it for Jesus now, kind of a thing. We tend to baptize that current value system into a newfound identity, not realizing what is actually going to fit inside of a Christian ethic and what won't. And so I think when we look at this passage about the baptism of Christ, we look at Clovis's baptism, we look at all this kind of stuff. This here is an interesting passage. Now, here's one of the icons. I really like old Orthodox icons, and they're different than trying to paint like a realistic painting. And one of the things that you'll notice with an icon, especially this one, is Jesus got a six-pack abs, doesn't he? Calm down, ladies. Like, now the thing here, that means something different in old iconography than it does today. Like today, like the six-pack abs is a symbol of status and health and strength and all that kind of stuff. But in this day, it means you don't have enough nourishment. You don't have enough food. There's weakness, humility, all starvation, detriment. All that is supposed to be communicated in that. So today is the first Sunday of Epiphany, recognizing the baptism of the Lord. And Epiphany means a sudden realization or revelation. I'm sure you've had those moments, like you're driving down the road. You don't really got to think about it. You've done this drive a million times, but you've got a problem that you've been trying to fix. And you're just driving there, not really thinking about it. And then all of a sudden, like, boom, like, oh, I figured it out. I know what to do, the creative solution, or what I'm supposed to say, or where I'm supposed to go. Like that sudden rush of creativity, inspiration, revelation, information up into the brain. That's called an epiphany. In cartoons, they illustrate it with a light bulb coming up over their head. You remember that in the old cartoons? Like, ding, the light bulb comes on, like, oh, I got an idea. That is epiphany, the sudden realization or revelation. Now, we all have epiphanies. We all need epiphanies. And that's the reason that we have to recognize epiphany every year, because our world is changing and we are changing and we need a new epiphany for the new year. Now, this isn't just about epiphanies that we have that are regular, like you got a creative solution for a problem at work you got to solve or something like that. Those are important and all, but it's not the epiphany that we're looking at today. The epiphany celebrates the revelation of how Jesus reveals the character of God to us. That's what the epiphany is. This whole season of epiphany is about Christ has been born into this world, and there is a revelation that is new about this character and nature of God that Christ is showing us, revealing to us. So in today's passage, Christ gets baptized. Now, why would Christ need to get baptized? Usually that's a sign of repentance, saying I'm going to change my ways. I'm going to start a new life. I'm going to turn over a new leaf, whatever your phrase is for that. It's a symbol of repentance, but it's weird that God gets baptized, right? What's going on with that? Why did Jesus what kind of repentance does perfection need to make? And the answer is none. Jesus didn't need any repentance. He was perfect. He had perfect, loving presence in the world. He was the perfect revelation of the character and nature of God. So instead of asking, why does God need to come and do a baptism of repentance, saying, what kind of statement is Christ making about this baptism? So let's kind of jump in and take a look here. It's a shorter passage. It says that Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and here you come to me. But Jesus answered, let it be for now, for this is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness. And then he consented. So we've got to remember that Matthew is written to a Jewish audience. So when you run into interesting facts in Matthew, it's not just facts for facts' sake, because, this is an interesting thing that happened. Let me throw that in there. A lot of those nitty-gritty detail facts are actually what Matthew is doing to try and root the story in the narrative of the Old Testament, which the Hebrew people are going to be, that was going to be their foundations and stuff. So he's attempting to root this narrative in the historical stories that they're going to know, that they're going to be very familiar with. Now, one detail is that there is a movement from Galilee to the Jordan. You're like, okay, Jesus went from Galilee to the Jordan River. Is that just across the street? Is that I don't know the geography of the area very well. I've never been there. How big of a journey are we talking here, right? So Jesus goes for a bit of a stroll, about 80 miles worth of a stroll. It's a long time to be traveling on foot, isn't it? 80 miles. That's 4 to 10 day journey through rugged terrain with just some sandals on. And they weren't ergonomically correct sandals. They were just a flat piece of something with a leather strap on the top of it. But Jesus' movement from Galilee to the Jordan is not just geographically changing. He's also making a theological journey. And Matthew wants us to note this. Galilee is the back country. It's the place of the poor. It's the place of the overlooked. It's the sticks. It's the boonies. Maybe we call it Galitucky. You know how we put Tucky on the back of anything that's super rural? That's what Galilee is. It's out there. And he goes from there to the Jordan. And the Jordan is a historical site where the people, after they left Egypt in the book of Exodus, wandered through the desert for 40 years. That was the book of Numbers. They finally leave the wilderness to find a home. Book of Joshua comes up, and they cross this very river, the Jordan River, to find their home. And it says that the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant on their sides, have you ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? There's a picture of the covenant there. The Ark of the Covenant would be on 4 poles. It was a box with a couple angels on top. And they put some fancy religious stuff in there, but it was a symbol of God's very presence with them. It was an important religious item for them. And it was on poles, and 4 people carried it. And there were priests that carried it. And it says when the priests walked into the Jordan River, as soon as their feet touched the river, the whole thing dried up. And they crossed on dry ground. So it's almost like a second Red Sea crossing. Almost like Moses had handed things over to Joshua, and Joshua's like, Remember what Moses did? We can do that still, because it wasn't Moses, it was God, and God is still with us. That was what was being communicated in that. So for them, it was a cross, not just that God did this miraculous thing and it was pretty cool, but it was a cross from slavery to freedom for them, because they were enslaved for 500 years by the Egyptians. And so they got out of slavery. They walked around the desert for 40 years, and now they're finally finding a home. And so it was a cross from slavery to freedom, from wandering to a promised land. And Jesus steps deliberately into this space, charged with that memory, not as a mere, like an act of repentance, but one of solidarity, saying, I am with you. And this prophet named John is making God as available as water, which was a specific attack on the political and religious system that became oppressive to the poor of the area. And Jesus says, me too, in that moment. I stand with you. Historically, all of us, for all time, up until this moment here, I'm with you. Here's another icon that I really enjoy. So he enters the water where Israel's false confidence is being dismantled, because they kept saying, no, like, we're totally good. Like, God is on our side because he's always been on our side. And so we are inheritors of God's law, of God's presence, of God's blessings. We inherited it all, and it can never, ever, ever be taken from us. And they're like, we could do whatever we want with it. And they created this oppressive temple system that was oppressive to the poor. And they said, but we're inheritors of God's law and God's presence and God's blessing, so it doesn't matter. We can do what we want. But they have forsaken the poor. They've established hierarchies that oppress the people. They have commingled their political and economic greed with the language of God's blessing. And here, this invitation, Christ stepping into the waters, he's telling them, worship what you have burned, and burn what you have worshipped. It's an invitation for them, a radical, socially transforming repentance that he's asking those people to do. Salvation and liberation are the same words, and they always begin with solidarity. Because if you are on the outside of a system and you just want to practice like superior benevolence, like I will help all these mentally little poor people out there, then you don't actually get to experience the liberation with them. You might help out a need here or there. I love what we do with the benevolent fund here. When people come and ask for help, and it's financial help, they usually start groveling. They're just like, and we'll be here at church on Sunday forever and ever. And I'm just like, stop talking. We're just trying to help you out. One, I know it's not true. And two, I know it doesn't need to be. Like, just here's the help you need. Go do what you got to do with it, right? Like, you have to stand in solidarity with people to meet them where they are. Because if you're separate from them, God doesn't even do that. God's not saying, I'm going to be separate from you. He's like, I'm going to enter the human experience as a human person in Jesus and live the life that y'all live, just like you. And so God practices solidarity to bring us salvation and liberation. So we can't expect that we're going to be able to help other people from a place of separateness. We have to stand with them wherever they are, however they are. And God chooses to be found among those who are honest and authentic in naming their wounds and their hurts. So Christ here is choosing to stand publicly with this movement, calling these power structures into account. Now, John is included in this invitation to repentance. You notice his words when he says, what are you doing? Like, you're asking me to baptize you when I should be baptized by you. His resistance to baptizing Jesus reveals how deeply ingrained the social hierarchies are for him, even among the faithful. He's looking for a continuation of the current ways of how we've organized things, but with better people in the driver's seat. Like, that's how we normally think of how to fix things, right? We'll get that person out of the seat and then put this person in the seat, and now we're good to go. And we don't actually question and say, do we need the seat? Can we put the seat over here? Can we rearrange things? Can we change things? Can we change how we find someone to put in the seat? And so instead of just saying, well, let's just put somebody better in the seat, in the driver's seat, what if God here is saying there's a total reorientation that I'm envisioning for how y'all are going to be organized in the future? But John fails to see that total reorientation that God envisions in this moment. He fails to see it because he still thinks that the hierarchies, the way that they're in, is the way that God has ordained it to be forever and ever. And his resistance to baptizing Jesus, I'm wondering, like how much of that was just him revealing how deeply ingrained this whole hierarchy system is. Because if Jesus is better than me, and then who am I better than? And then who are they better than? And then like this whole system. And Jesus is calling us not to establish all these hierarchies with so-and-so is better than so-and-so is better than so-and-so, but saying let's stand in solidarity together. But we really can't blame John because there's this natural confusion when faced with a God who refuses superiority, when that's how we function as humans all the time. We have to organize ourselves and we always ask the question, who's in charge? Like when you walk into a restaurant and stuff's not the way that it ought to be, you're like, who's the manager here? Show me who's in charge. That's how we organize ourselves. But God doesn't do that. He stands in solidarity with all of us, human beings. And this baptism moment is the ultimate stance of solidarity, where he blesses the waters that will forever baptize all of us. This is one of my favorite books from Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited. He said, there must be a profound reorientation of values. That's what repentance is. Repentance is not just, would you stop doing that bad thing and start doing these good things over here? Stop making God mad and make God happy with your actions. That's not repentance at all. Although that's what we think it might be. When really it's getting above the mind that causes the actions that you're doing that God is asking for. Because oftentimes when we just start doing better things than we do with the previous life, we're just relabeling our old value system with new spiritual language and not doing a deeper repentance. Like we have to take this interior journey to all the places that our vices have gone to hide and even have disguised themselves with religious language. And vices can hide amongst religious people the best because we have all the right language and all the right behaviors and all that. And I've noticed this, like the vices that we see all around us when they can disguise themselves in religious language. There's this one time I was young and stupid. Had nothing to do with fire, but we were at this conference and there was my friend standing next to me and we had a competition. We always had this competition, who was going to be better than who kind of a thing. Right. And so we're at this conference and everyone's singing the songs and like everyone's like raising up their hands and really getting into it. And I was like, I can do that. I raise up my hands a little bit. I'm getting into the moment. And then my friend, I noticed that he's done that too. And I'm like, well, I can raise my hands a little higher than he can. This is a true story, y'all. I was this dumb. And then he noticed that my hands were higher than his hands and he raised his hands up a little higher. I was like, wow, he's outdoing me. So I was like, he's not going to outdo me. So I just shot him straight up in the air like I'm calling a touchdown. Like there's way up there. And I'm 6'4". So he's like, he stood on his chair. I was like, man, that is sneaky. He stood on his chair and then he did the touchdown. I was like, there's only one way that is going to beat this one out. I dropped to my knees. I'm like, oh yeah, beat that one. Was I really having some profound worship moment or was I in competition, right? Spiritual vices can go into hiding really easy among religious people. All the vices that we repented of, because we can just relabel them as worship or relabel them as generosity or relabel them as however we want and not get at the heart of the things that plague us as humans. And what Jesus is calling for is a deep, profound reorientation of what we value. And what we value, it takes a long, long time to get the repentance that we declare down into the deep places of our inner soul. And we have to be patient with ourselves and we have to be honest with ourselves. Because if we're not honest and we try to put on the spiritual show, that is vices putting the disguise on and hiding. And we'll never deal with them if we're hiding them or if they are hiding from us. And this repentance it gets to those deeper places. And it's a long work. It's a lifetime work. And you never really get there. You never really arrive. But when you stop hiding, when you stop trying to be perfect, you can finally like have freedom to be good. You're just like, I'm just me. Sometimes I mess up. But you don't have to be perfect in order to make God happy. But when you stop trying to be perfect, sometimes you can just be good. This baptism is an identity marker for us. Like that's what baptism is, not just about clean up your old life kind of a thing, but it's an identity marker that says there's something different going on here. When Jesus been baptized, he came up out of the water. Suddenly the heavens were open to him and he saw God's Spirit descending like a dove, alighting on him, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." I love that passage. Now we talked about Clovis and his baptism and how about it was really just about him like securing more power and alliances with the church and all this other stuff. And there's some stories that I've been reading from the Black Southern church under slavery and Jim Crow segregation and the baptisms that they had to do. Good Lord, have mercy. Like contrasting Clovis's baptism of power and comfort that expands his power and influence, we can now look at river baptisms in the South under the, slavery and Jim Crow segregation laws, which is closer to what was happening in the river of Jesus' day, right? In these baptisms here, they gather quietly near the riverbank. They're not singing, they're not celebrating, they're not clapping, they're not praying out loud yet because sound's going to carry and the patrols are on the loose. The dogs are out. The enslaved man, he would come to be baptized, had to walk miles in the dark, slipping away from the quarters, with or without permission, watched over by people who knew what it meant if he did get caught. And the enslavers they often allowed baptism of black folk, but only if it taught them obedience. Servants, obey your masters was one of their confessions that they had to make in the waters of baptism. The enslavers they feared an inclusive belonging. They had to keep that social hierarchy in place. And the black preacher who was doing the baptizing, who was also enslaved, sometimes secretly ordained, sometimes simply called because the Spirit chose him, he stood knee deep in this current of the water and he spoke softly but firmly. And he would ask them, "Do you know who you are?" He would ask them, do you know whose you are? Because this baptism was not about heaven later. It was about declaring the truth about who I am in the moment. And when they went down in the water and they came up out, they were not greeted by songs and applause. Sometimes they were greeted by the bay of the hound that was tracking them, the sound of a police whistle or shouts of a mob. The community would scatter and hide and run and try to get back to their quarters before they were found to be gone. But something happened because the next time one of the enslavers told him that he was just mere property, he would remember the river. The next time the world said he was nothing, he would remember the voice of God that said, "You are mine." Once you have gone under the water, no chain can tell you who you are ever again. And that's why these baptisms were absolutely radical and revolutionary. Former enslaved people who described baptism as the moment that they realized they didn't belong as property to the people that enslaved them. It was like often the moment when enslaved people claimed an identity that no master could revoke. That's really closer to the baptism that's happening in Jesus' day. The baptism of Christ reveals the identity of Christ. Like those baptisms of the black folk in the river. Like that was an identity that then took them out of what the world was telling them that they were. This baptism of Christ reveals an identity of Christ. It says, "This is my son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased." And this Christ, like he is in solidarity with all of us. And so these words are spoken over all of us as well. The heaven opens is a symbol not just of apocalypse, of not destruction, but more of an unveiling of what God has always thought about all his children is now being made visible. And this closed system of human power and empire is breached by the Spirit of God descending upon a naked, poor Middle Eastern man in a river in the middle of the desert. Identity precedes activity and accomplishment in this story. Before Jesus heals anybody, before he teaches anything, before he goes and confronts power, before he does any of that stuff, he is named beloved. But this naming stands against every human power system that declares some lives to be disposable and other lives are more important. Because Christ is in the river for all of us, cleansing the waters of baptism for all time. That's why we say a prayer when we baptize over the waters to bless the waters. Not because anything super magical happens, but because we're invoking this symbolism and the Spirit of God in this moment. and the human soul's deepest truth is spoken out loud. You are God's beloved, and he is well pleased. And when we forget that the humans we are interacting with is a beloved of God, it's the root of all violence. Howard Thurman would declare that the sound of his voice still echoes wherever human dignity is reclaimed. That voice of God echoes wherever human dignity is reclaimed. So this light that we cannot see is spoken before it's enacted and trusted before it's proven. Humans love the things we can see and control and manage and create systems of blessing distribution around, with us on the top siphoning off some of the proceeds, by the way. We love that. That's how we do things. But the light we cannot see is something we are asked to trust in without controlling. So do you believe that love is the better way? Is the question. Do you believe that you are the beloved of God? Do you believe that that person you're interacting with that you don't like very much is the beloved of God? If you really believe it, then there should be no violence in the world whatsoever. If we all believed that we were the beloved and they were the beloved, there would be no violence. So here's a couple of reflection questions for you. What hierarchies make it hard to believe God stands with you? What voices shape your sense of belovedness? What would it mean to live from identity rather than achievements? And here's something, a practice you can try. The next time you wash your hands, hopefully it'll be a couple times a day, take your time, slow down, and recall this story of Christ's baptism, and try to hear the same voice of God calling you beloved as you cleanse whatever off of your hands.